So let's go.
Carthage began as a Phoenician colony in
There
the
you go.
9th century BC,
Yes.
around modern-day Tunisia. Now, many
Yeah.
speak about the diversity of the Phoenicians as well. Their exact origin still isn't clear, but most agree that they came from the Levant region.
Yeah.
But it continues to be an ongoing debate, because Herodotus tells us something that we simply can't ignore concerning the origin of the Phoenicians. This is what Herodotus has to say. This nation, according to their own account, dwelt anciently upon the Rhathian Sea, but crossing thence fixed themselves on the sea coast of Syria, where they still inhabit.
Oh, I see where he's going with that. I'll have to disagree, but I'll let him finish.
So essentially Herodotus is telling us that according to Phoenician oral history, they may have been Africans from the Horn who migrated
I don't really think that they will be... Okay, let him speak.
to the Levant region. Now, even if this is true, that the Phoenicians were originally Africans, they still would have intermingled with the populations they encountered in the Levant.
I don't think that that's sustainable, because if they were Africans, the Phoenicians, then we would have been told so. Because the Romans did speak, and the Greeks did speak about the looks of people. They described people phenotypically. This idea, not that he's pushing it, but some people are, that the ancients didn't see color. The ancients didn't classify people by color. They didn't in the modern sense, of course, because the idea of white and black changes constantly, and it's very much of a construct that is loosely based on actual phenotypic traits. And that is simple. I mean, you could see that because people call me white, but sometimes they don't. I'm like, am I white or am I not white? Which one is it? No, you're not white, you're Italian. Italians are not white. But then someone else will say, why is this white man talking to us? I'm like, wait, I thought I wasn't a white man. Which one is it? Now, I do identify as white. I think someone who's European and has pale skin is white. That's how I use it. But there are people, for example, in some areas in America that only consider white people of Anglo-Saxon descent or Nordic. But even Irish are not considered white, even though I don't understand how that's possible since Irish are as white as this. With that being said, it is what it is. It changes with time, and even black can change with time. So it is a construct, but it is loosely rooted on real physical characteristics that can be seen and everybody saw since the prehistory. Absolutely. This idea that, oh no, differences in color is a modern creation, not true. In fact, the Romans used the term white, used the term blonde, and used the term black, and describe people by their phenotypic trait. It's just that they didn't have a modern racial approach for obvious reasons, but I think it's kind of a tribalistic nature of, oh, those people look blonde, we don't, they're different from us. Oh, those people look black, we don't, oh, they're different from us. That happens. This has always happened since probably the Paleolithic period, whenever there was migration of population clusters. And then there is the whole iconography. Every time we see in iconography Phoenicians represented, they don't look black. So we can't just disregard all of the iconography. But yeah.
Originally Africans, they still would have intermingled with the populations they encountered in the Levant, diversifying their group.
Okay.
Regardless, this history concerning Phoenician origins is what causes a lot of controversy when it comes to the Africanness of Carthage, if you will. Now, even though the Phoenicians founded Carthage, it was the Libyans in Africa who largely peopled the area and played a dominant role in the development of its civilization. And the ancient population of Libya is yet another exhausting and confusing topic, as there seems to be diversity as well.
Absolutely. Okay, so we are in agreement. I actually appreciate, because the channels that annoy me are the ones that just make statements of fact just because they want things to be one way or another, whether it be that you want everyone to be white or whether it be that you want everyone to be black. At least he's looking at the sources, which anyone who spends time with the sources will come to this exact conclusion: multi-ethnicity in Northern Africa. And how couldn't it be? It is literally a conduit and a connection between three continents: Europe, Africa, and Asia. Of course it's going to be multi-ethnic, particularly in the areas of Libya, Northwest, Mauritania, all of that sections, Africa Proconsularis, but also Aegyptus, so Egypt, the Delta area would have been a lot more multi-ethnic than, I want to say, Upper Egypt. Upper Egypt would have had a high percentage of black Egyptians and also intermingling with Nubians, Upper Egypt, but the Delta area, I strongly think the black people were a minority there. But still, we're not talking about Egypt. Let's go with Hannibal.
So from the very beginning, Carthage takes on various people groups from the Phoenicians and the Libyans, who at their core seem to be diverse. Also, we can't neglect the people groups who were already there before the arrival of Phoenicians and Libyans, perhaps mostly ancient Amazigh populations and other ethnic groups that may have reflected the realities of the former prehistoric population. But in order for this video to have any value in the diaspora, I must talk about the evidence about the argument for a so-called Black Carthage. When scholars from various fields began studying some skeletal remains of ancient Carthaginians, they found something interesting. They found the remains of the highly venerated priestess of Tanit, the most ornate
and she was black, exactly, yeah.
Most artistic sarcophagus found. Professor Eugene Betard had this to say about the discovery. The woman buried there had Negro features. She belonged to the African race. This discovery was pretty fascinating because religious figures held a lot of power in ancient societies. Thus, this black priestess, whoever she was certainly among the elite class within Carthage. Now, of course, the discovery of one black woman cannot reflect the entire populace. So what other evidence exists? Well, Professor Stefan Gesell apparently conducted a study on Carthaginian skeletons, and he declared that the so-called Semitic type, characterized by the long, perfectly oval face, the thin alkaline nose, and the lengthened cranium enlarged over the nape of the neck, has not yet been found in Carthage. That's a pretty strong statement. Now, assuming the skeletal remains
But I wish you also told us what the skeletons look like then.
of the Carthaginians were dated before the Roman and Vandal occupation, the previous comments by these professors no doubt challenge popular culture's view of Carthaginian demographics. But even though we haven't found the so-called Semitic type in Carthage, according to Professor Gesell, that still doesn't mean that black people were the predominant in Carthage. The previous
See, that's why I like this guy, because at least he's being fair with his positions. I often disagree with his statements and conclusions for what I've seen so far, but as you can see, at least it's not so, like, he will present both sides of the argument as it's supposed to be when you approach something professionally. He also has a very smooth voice, doesn't he? Like radio.
previous evidence for Phoenician and later Libyan dominance of Carthage, married with the comments from the professor, seems to prove what we've always seen throughout ancient North African history, which is a pretty diverse model. The big difference seems to be the status black people maintained in Carthage, because the
Fair, very good point, yes.
image of black people has been so tarnished over time. Anytime we look at ancient history, we immediately assume the presence of black people in highly civilized areas must have been slaves or held subservient positions. I think we can say with confidence that this was not at all the case in Carthage.
Yeah, I agree with that.
As we can see from the remains of a high priestess, black people were very much a part of elite Carthaginian civilization. The question
In fact, that would be a big difference between